The first time I heard the name Elvis Presley, my world turned upside down. It was 1959, and we were living in Germany. My father, Bill, was stationed there, and our lives were a mix of military discipline and the constant threat of war. My brothers, Ricky and David, and I were just kids, trying to make sense of a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, my father dropped a bombshell. "Private Presley checked in today," he said, his voice as flat as the concrete walls of our barracks. You'd have thought he was talking about the weather, but for us, it was like a lightning bolt had struck the room. My mother, Dee, looked up from her plate, her eyes widening. "Elvis Presley?" she repeated, her voice filled with a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. We had heard of Elvis, of course. He was the king of rock and roll, the guy who made girls scream and boys want to be him. But to hear that he was right there on the same base as us. My father nodded, his expression unchanged. "Yeah, the one and only," he muttered, focusing on his food as if it were the most important thing in the world. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, Ricky, the youngest of us, broke the silence. "Can we meet him?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. My father's jaw tightened, and he glanced at my mother. "I don't know, son," he said, his voice stern. "Elvis is a private, just like any other soldier. There's no special treatment." But my mother's face softened. "Maybe we can," she said, looking at us with a small smile. "Your father and Vernon, Elvis's dad, are friends. We'll see what we can do." That night, as I lay in my bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Elvis Presley. The idea that the famous singer was just a few miles away was both thrilling and surreal. I wondered what he was like in person. Was he as cool and confident as he appeared on stage? Or was he just another soldier, like the rest of us? The next day, my father left early for work, and my mother decided to take us on a walk around the base. As we strolled past the barracks, she pointed to a modest building. "That's where Elvis is staying," she said, her voice hushed, as if she were sharing a secret. I strained to see through the windows, but they were dark. "Do you think he's in there right now?" I asked, my heart pounding. My mother laughed softly. "Who knows, but maybe one day you'll get to meet him." That day, I didn't realize how much that simple walk and those few words would change our lives. I didn't know that within a year, we would be living in a mansion called Graceland, and Elvis would become not just a friend, but a brother. But for now, all I knew was that the king of rock and roll was somewhere nearby, and that made everything feel a little bit more magical. My father was an alcoholic, dealing with the pain of war. He often told me, "Billy, nobody ever survives war. I don't care if they come home or not." He came home physically, but the war had left deep scars. He and my mother grew distant over time, especially after Vernon entered our lives. Vernon's wife, Gladys, had passed away the year before, and he and my mother would talk on the phone a lot when my father was away. When my father was home, he would go out with Vernon, and sometimes my mom joined them. It was a strange dynamic, but it became even stranger when my father asked Vernon to take my mom out because he couldn't do it anymore. Vernon, a widower, was drawn to my mother's energy and charm. She was a petite blonde with blue eyes and was a great cook. They started seeing each other regularly, and Vernon wanted to marry her. By then, my parents had already decided to get a divorce. Their arguments had gotten worse, especially since Vernon came into the picture. It was just a matter of time before Vernon would become our stepfather. Elvis was a worldwide sensation, but Vernon was more prominent in my life when we lived in Germany. He would sometimes mention, "I've got a son named Elvis," but never emphasized that Elvis was a famous rock and roll musician or a movie star. Before meeting Elvis, I never thought of him as anything special, just Vernon's son. Vernon knew Elvis was coming back to the States in 1960 after his Army service. So he and my mother decided to get us kids back before then, and returned to Germany to finalize the divorce. Vernon took us to the airport, and there was no discussion about what was happening. Kids back then were seen but not heard, so we just sat there and didn't ask questions. My main memory from the airport was the foggy German night and the airplane steps. When I got to the top, I turned around to see Vernon and my father. My life was changing right before my eyes. One man was coming into the picture, and the other was going out. My mother needed to arrange temporary housing for us boys. The best she could do was with our Aunt Peggy, but her trailer was already crowded with her 2 teenagers. We stayed there for about a month. Vernon then found a boarding school and arranged for our stay there. When we arrived, the staff showed us around and made it seem like a great place, even taking us for a boat ride. But as soon as Vernon and my mother left, things changed. The headmistress took us to our room and told us not to ask questions. When we were corrected, they put Tabasco sauce on our tongues. It burned a lot, but over the years I came to enjoy it. During Halloween, the older kids said they would come get us later, but they never did. I saw them through the window, getting into cars and leaving without us. It was a harsh lesson in how the older kids got everything and we got nothing. We felt like our mother had abandoned us. We received phone calls promising she would pick us up soon, but nothing happened. The real kicker came during Christmas. We saw other kids leaving with their families, but no one came for us. We were left there with only one other kid. We didn't understand what was happening or what a divorce was. All we knew was that we were alone. At age 6, I said my first prayer, asking God to get us out of there. Around the same time, Elvis was finishing his army service. My mother traveled back to the States with him and took the train to Memphis. One day she called us at the school and said she would pick us up in a few days to take us to our new home. We were excited but also apprehensive after our last experience. We packed our few belongings and waited. When our mother arrived, we saw a brand new black Lincoln Continental. It was the biggest car I had ever seen. David asked, "Where's Dad?" My mom replied, "You boys know Vernon. He is going to be your new father." We didn't understand, but we were just happy to leave. We piled into the car and headed to our new home in Memphis. It was a chilly night in March 1960 when we arrived at Graceland. We fell asleep on the way, and my mother excitedly woke us up, saying, "This is your new home." Vernon honked the horn, and the gates slowly opened. The house was lit up, and it looked like a castle straight out of a Disney movie. Vernon led us through the back door, and we were greeted by Alberta, a large, loving black woman who made us feel welcome. She said, "I'm going to treat these boys like my own." She hugged us, and it made everything disappear. We were then led downstairs to meet Elvis, who was playing pool. He saw us, set down his cue, and walked over, scooping us up in his arms. He said, "Daddy, I always wanted a little brother, and now I have 3. Elvis asked us about our interests, and then took us upstairs to get ready for bed. He taught us to say our prayers, and we knelt with him, feeling protected for the first time in months. He promised to love and protect us for the rest of his life. I fell asleep in wonder. The next morning, Elvis woke us up, yelling, "We've got to go outside." He ran us outside to the backyard, which was filled with toys. Bikes, cars, balls, 3 of each one. He had bought all these toys for us based on our answers from the night before. We were in awe. Elvis played with us all day, showing us how to ride the bikes and explaining his cars. He even showed me a red, battery-operated car that was just for me. He explained how to drive it and promised to teach me how to race cars. Those first 24 hours at Graceland were magical. It wasn't just about the size of the house or the toys. It was about the love and protection we felt. Elvis didn't just talk about love, he lived it. He was a living example of God's love, and he made us feel like we were his own kids. He prayed with us, played with us, and promised to take care of us. We were finally home. He knows just what I need. In my collection of old photos, there's one taken at Graceland in October 1960. My brothers and I were playing cowboys and Indians near the gates that day. We didn't usually play there, but someone must have called us over. Fans often yelled for us to come to them when they saw us in the yard. They'd always ask, "What are you doing here, kid?" I'd always answer, "I live here." Graceland was the first real home we ever had. That photo captures a defining moment in our young lives. We were on the inside, looking out at the world. The view was amazing, but it wasn't about the mansion, the cars, or the toys. It was about the family. God knew that what my brothers and I needed most was a stable, secure family who could lead us to Jesus. Elvis was at the center of this family. He was every bit the fun-loving, warm, and caring person you'd expect, and more. In that setting of a secure and loving family, we began to learn more about Jesus. After we moved to Graceland, My mom made sure we were in church every time the doors were open. That was 2 times on Sunday and once on Wednesday. Whitehaven Church of Christ was practically our second home. From 1960 to 1969, I was there at every service, vacation Bible school, or event. My mom even enrolled us in the Christian school they had. One day, the pastor asked if anyone had any questions. I raised my hand and said, "I have a friend who goes to the Baptist church." The pastor interrupted me and said, "Well, he's going to hell." I was completely confused. I had learned that you shouldn't pass judgment as a Christian, but that's exactly what the pastor had done. In that moment, I began to wonder why some Christians were so quick to pass judgment on those who didn't conform to their rigid standard. Vernon, my stepdad, never went to church with us, and neither did Elvis. I was curious, and one time I asked, "Elvis, why don't you go to church?" He smiled and said, "Well, Billy, I love going to church, and you know how much I read the Bible, right? Yes. But I'm afraid if I go in, people will pay more attention to me than the preacher." Then Elvis explained Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, where Jesus said, "For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them." Elvis knew that being the church and worshiping with God's people didn't always have to be in a church building. Elvis wasn't usually a morning person, but he watched a lot of gospel preachers on TV. Sometimes he would get up, especially on Sundays when he was in Memphis, and watch the gospel shows. He would just sit there and listen. Sometimes he would talk about going to church when he was growing up. Elvis told me that after he and his family moved to Memphis in 1948, he would sometimes sneak out of the house and go to the black churches to watch their gospel shows. He said, "Billy, when I first became famous, people thought I was the Antichrist because I moved around on stage." "What do you mean?" He explained, "The Holy Spirit touches these gospel singers, and they can't stand still. They inspired me to move the same way." Even some of the black gospel churches in Memphis would welcome Elvis. He said, "I would stand there on the back row and watch the preachers. The black preachers seem to know God better than most people. You can hear it in their voices. They've got a personal relationship with God." Elvis had the same thing. I'll never forget him saying, "Me and God are close. We're so close. He knows me by my first name, and I know his name." Because of my relationship with Elvis, and because I'm a Christian, people often ask me where I got my faith. I learned it from Elvis. It's one of the many gifts he gave me. He talked to God. He would pray. Sometimes he would sit in his room, closed off in silence with nobody around. He would say, "Just talk to God like I'm talking to you right now." Elvis was always asking God for help or guidance. Sometimes he would sit in his room and talk to God out loud, just like you would talk to another person. He even had the Serenity Prayer posted on the wall in his bedroom at Graceland. People called Elvis the king, but his response was, "No, there is only one true king. That's Jesus." Even though I learned a lot from Elvis about faith, and I was involved in church as well, I still had questions. One time, I went to his room to ask him a particularly confusing question. I said, "We have the Church of Christ, Methodist, Catholic, Baptist, and other denominations. Which one is correct? What do you mean?" I explained, "Well, they all say you've got to believe this way or that way, especially the Church of Christ." I had always been taught that if you didn't believe like the Church of Christ, you would go to hell. Which one should I believe? Elvis pointed to his Bible and said, "Everything you should believe is right there. Don't put labels on anything. That's where you get hung up. But as long as you believe that Jesus came and died for your sins with all your heart and soul, that's all you need. Well, what about trying to be right or wrong? If you believe what the Bible says, you'll do right." He also added, "Don't put your eyes on any man, even me. They all fall short. Nobody can live the perfect life. Put your faith in the Lord and look to him." I had plenty of spiritual conversations with Elvis over the years. But those conversations happened in a setting of fun and family. When you feel loved and accepted, and you're having a lot of fun, you're much more open to spiritual teaching. Life at Graceland was no exception. We were throwing the football in the front yard one day. Elvis was doing the throwing, while me, Rick, David, and some of the guys were the receivers. As I was lining up, Elvis yelled, "Go long, Billy." That meant he wanted to throw a deep pass, so I took off as fast as I could run. I was looking back as Elvis threw the ball. I watched as it arched in the air and made an adjustment in my route, so the ball would land in my hands. I was thinking, boy, this is going to look cool. Just as the ball was about to touch my hands, I saw a tree in the corner of my eye. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground, looking at the sky. I didn't know you could see stars in daylight, but I saw them that day. I had run into the tree. As I lay there, I heard laughing and managed to raise up a little. I looked back, and there was Elvis, lying on the ground laughing. Everyone else was bent over, holding their stomachs as they laughed. I wanted to get up, but I was still reeling from the collision, so I lay back down. A couple of seconds later, Elvis was standing above me with a concerned look on his face. He asked, "Are you okay, Billy?" "Yeah, I'm okay." As soon as I said that, he started laughing again. I could see tears were coming to his eyes. By now, everyone was standing around me, laughing. I lay there and eventually managed to smile because I knew it had to look funny, me running into a tree. Elvis then asked, "Can you get up?" I said, "Yeah, I think so." He reached his hand out to help me up. As I stood there, everyone asked if I was okay. I reassured them I was. Then Elvis said, "I think that's enough football for today. Let's go inside." As we walked toward the house, Elvis put his arm around my shoulders and said, "You really looked great, Billy. I thought you had it, and it would have been a great catch." "Thanks, Elvis, but who put that tree in my way?" He had to sit on the steps as he started laughing again. I stood there, looking at him and smiling, which made him laugh even harder. The tears came back and he begged me, "Please stop, Billy, please." I was getting a kick out of seeing Elvis laughing and begging me to stop. So I made it even funnier and said, "Are you okay, Elvis? You need any help getting up?" I put my hand out as he had done, that made him laugh even more. He begged harder now. "Please, Billy, please stop." It took a few minutes for him to stop laughing. I even laughed a little myself. Finally he got up and we walked into the house. As the day wore on, Elvis would ask if I was okay. I said I was, then he'd smile at me. "You are one tough guy, Billy." "Thanks, Elvis. I learned something today." "What's that?" "I'll never go long again. You can bet your money on that." That got him laughing all over again. Elvis taught me that spiritual training has to happen in an atmosphere of love, acceptance, and good old-fashioned fun. We would often go outside to throw the football around with some of the guys. It was part of life at Graceland. He took the time to build a relationship with us, so that we would be receptive to what he was teaching us. One of the reasons life at Graceland was so much fun is that Elvis was constantly giving gifts to people. He loved making others happy. However, he didn't like people making a fuss over his birthday. One year, when we were a bit older, my brothers and I were determined to give Elvis something special for his birthday on January 8th. We looked at each other and said, "What do we give this guy? He's got everything in the world." We knew he loved cars, so we decided to build him some model cars. We each picked out a different car, then we put them together and painted them ourselves. They weren't professionally built, of course, but we did the best we could. We wrapped the model cars in paper, placed them in shoeboxes, and stuffed paper around the cars so they wouldn't rattle around. Elvis was notorious for shaking gifts and trying to guess what was inside. We wanted it to be a surprise, so we did our best to keep it a mystery. When Elvis was opening his gifts, he spotted ours and said, "Oh, I see these are from Billy, Ricky, and David. I wonder what they could be." Sure enough, he shook the boxes, trying to figure out what was inside. When he opened the boxes, he seemed genuinely delighted. He hugged each of us and said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He told everyone there, "These are the best presents I got this year." You would have thought we had given him real cars from the look on his face, and how happy he was. After everyone left, he asked my brothers and me to follow him up to his room. He took the cars and placed them on his desk. We sat and talked for a little while. As he was looking at the cars, tears came to his eyes. He asked us to come to where he was sitting, behind his desk. Then he hugged us again. He said, "You guys are the best birthday present I ever got." We smiled at him and said, "Happy birthday, Elvis." He was the best gift anyone had given to us. The gift of Elvis's presence was especially meaningful whenever he was absent. This was especially obvious when he was gone for longer periods of time for a movie shoot. During the 1960s, Elvis would shoot multiple movies per year. so every few months he would leave to do another one. After each movie, Vernon would get a call from Elvis. He would tell him, "Daddy, we're leaving LA," and then what time he would get home. When we got the news, Graceland would fill with anticipation. We would all gather around to welcome him home. Every time Elvis came home, it was a big deal. My brothers and I would usually miss school the next day because it would be late when he would arrive. All the employees, the wives and girlfriends of the entourage, would be there with us. The atmosphere was so thick with excitement, you could cut it with a knife. We would usually get a call when Elvis and his entourage were in Arkansas, and someone would give us an estimated arrival time. Whoever took the call would tell us how many hours away they were. The excitement would rise even higher with each passing minute. Then it happened. The guard at the gate would call the house and say, "They are pulling through the gates now." We would all run to the front door, walk out onto the steps, and watch the bus make its way to the front door. When the bus came to a stop, the door would open. We would all start to applaud. That's how excited we were. As Elvis stepped from the bus, he would exclaim, "It's great to be home." Then he would make his way around the crowd, giving everyone a hug. He would also thank them for welcoming him home. After he finished with everyone, Elvis would look for us boys. When he saw us, we'd run to him, and he would kneel down and give us a hug. He would ask how we were doing and what we had been up to. After a couple of minutes, he would stand up, put David on his shoulders, and then Rick and I would grab his legs and hang on. Even the house seemed to change when Elvis came home. It was full of life again. Elvis's presence was so strong, it seemed even to make the house glow. Homecomings at Graceland were always a big affair. On that day when we became part of rock and roll's first family, I was introduced to a world people can only dream about. At that time, we didn't know who Elvis was or what he did for a living. We were too young to care, but we knew he was special. There was something about him that drew us close to him. In our eyes, he was just like us, only bigger. As I look back on that time, it's almost like a fairy tale, complete with a king and a castle. My life was a rock and roll version of Camelot, but I wasn't just one of the king's men. I was his brother. You'll never walk alone. Most people who have older siblings go to them for advice. It was no different with us, except the person we went to was Elvis Presley. We asked him for advice about everything: life, love, girls, music, faith, career, you name it. I often call this my Elvis education, because I learned so much from him. When we would go to him for advice, he would always give us a loving, knowing smile, then say, "What is it, young one?" Then he would proceed to discuss whatever topic we brought to him. He always had time for us and never rushed through the discussion. After our talks, we'd walk away with a newfound sense of confidence or a fresh perspective. Elvis took great pride in playing his newfound role as a big brother. At Graceland, the school of life was in session every day. Sometimes the lessons took place in the most unusual ways. Many people don't know that Elvis loved cartoons. My brothers and I loved them, of course, but to our great surprise, he came to love them too. When he was home, it became our Wednesday night tradition to watch the Bugs Bunny show. We'd take some chairs from the kitchen table and pull them closer to the TV. Elvis's way of bonding with us was special. We'd be watching TV, and if someone tried to interrupt, Elvis would put his hand up or say, "It can wait until the show is over." We'd smile, he'd wink, and we'd keep watching. One time, I asked Elvis why he liked the cheesy 1960s show, Star Trek. He said he liked Spock's logic. I was surprised, but Elvis just laughed and said, "There's nothing wrong with a little cheese." Elvis taught us to embrace childhood. He'd say, "Let them be kids, Daddy. You only get to be a kid for a short time." Our mom, Dee, and Vernon sometimes worried about our schooling because Elvis would keep us out late. But Elvis believed in the value of life experiences. He'd tell us, "Always dream big, Billy. There's nothing you can't do. The only thing holding you back is yourself. Don't listen to those who say you can't do something. They're the ones who gave up on their own dreams." One night, Elvis woke us up to go to the fairgrounds. Mom was worried because it was a school night, but Elvis said, "There's more to life than learning from books. There are life experiences, and I want my boys to have both." Even though Mom and Elvis sometimes disagreed, it was hard for anyone to resist his charm. Elvis also taught us about music. When I started a band, I recorded a song and was nervous to play it for Elvis. He listened, smiled, and gave us tips. The music was good, but the vocals need more work, he said. He showed me how to sing from my stomach instead of my throat. The next time you practice, show them what I taught you, he said. Elvis didn't just teach us about rock and roll. He mentored us in all kinds of music. He even played How Great Thou Art on the piano, and taught me about the song's meaning. Elvis was more than just a brother to us. He was a father figure, a mentor, and a friend. He showed us a world where anything was possible, and dreams could come true. When Vernon and Mom got married, it made official what we already felt in our hearts. Elvis said, "We're now officially brothers. We're going to be a big, happy family." Vernon promised to take care of us like we were his own. It took time to get used to calling him Daddy, but Elvis always reminded us, "I'll always be here for you. I'll take care of you." Life at Graceland was a mix of fun, learning, and family. We spent our days playing, helping with the animals, and learning from Elvis. Even though we faced challenges, Elvis made sure we had a safe and secure place to grow and dream. He was the most reliable friend and brother anyone could ask for. Vernon had a way of turning tough situations into valuable lessons. One of those times was when Rick, David, and I were sent home from school for fighting. It wasn't because we were troublemakers. We were just trying to stand up for ourselves and others. When Vernon came to pick us up, I always braced myself, thinking I was in for a scolding. But instead, he surprised us with stories about Elvis's own school days. Elvis had the same problem in school, Vernon would say. Some kids would pick on him because he looked different. They thought it would make them look tough. Hearing this, I felt a connection to Elvis that went beyond being his stepbrother. It made me understand that it's okay to be different, and it's important to stand up for what's right. Vernon and Elvis both taught us the importance of family. They showed us that no matter how much fame and success you have, the love and support of your family are the most valuable things you can have. One day, Elvis picked me up from school, and I told him a joke some kids had been saying about being a stepbrother. He stopped the car, his face serious. "Where did you hear that?" he asked. "From the kids at school," I replied, a little scared. Elvis got angry, but not at me. "I don't care what any of the kids said. You're my brother. You always will be." That moment made me realize how much Elvis cared about us. Vernon and Elvis also had their disagreements, but they were rare. One of the few times I saw them argue was when Elvis wanted to change our last names to Presley. Our birth father refused, and it was clear that this was a big deal. Later, Elvis explained to us that he had tried but couldn't change our names. Even though I still carry my birth father's last name, I've always thought of Vernon as my father and Elvis as my brother. As we grew up, we gradually understood how famous Elvis was. One day, when I was in first grade, Elvis picked me up from school in the pink Cadillac. He was signing autographs, and I didn't know what to make of it. He said, "Would you like to sign some autographs too, Billy?" I wrote my name on the pieces of paper people handed in, and it was a weird but exciting experience. I asked Elvis if he was famous, and he laughed, saying, "Some people think I am." Over the years, we watched Elvis's movies and listened to his records. We still didn't fully grasp how big a star he was, but we saw him as our brother. Our first concert was on February 25th, 1961, at the Ellis Auditorium. Vernon and Mom tried to explain what a concert was, but we didn't really get it. When Elvis walked on stage, the crowd went wild. We were confused at first, but as the music started, we got into it. After the show, Elvis asked us what we thought. We told him we liked it, and he smiled, saying, "This is just the beginning, boys." It wasn't until 1969, when I was 16, that I truly understood Elvis's impact. I was supposed to go to Woodstock, but the family went to Vegas for Elvis's opening act. I didn't expect much, but when Elvis came out, I was blown away. The energy in the room was electric, and I felt like I was seeing Elvis for the first time. That's when I realized why people called him the King. Living with Elvis and Vernon, I learned the importance of family, standing up for what's right, and the value of love and support. These lessons stayed with me as I grew up, and became a father myself. I vowed to be the kind of father I had always wanted, a present and loving one, just like Elvis and Vernon were to me. It was a typical evening at the Presley household when I heard a knock at the door. I was the oldest, so I jumped up to answer it. When I opened the door, a man with an English accent stood there. "Hello, my name is Brian Epstein. I'm the road manager of the Beatles. Is Mr. Presley here?" I leaned to the right and saw a limo with the 4 Beatles sitting there. I said, "Yes, sir, let me get him for you." I closed the door and ran to the living room yelling, "The Beatles are here, the Beatles are here." My mom wouldn't let us go outside to meet them, though, because of John Lennon's comment that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. It was a missed opportunity, but it was still exciting to know they were so close. Elvis once told me the Beatles asked him, "How do you do it? The pressure is unbelievable. There's 4 of us, and that helps relieve some of the pressure, but there's only 1 of you." Elvis didn't answer. He just sat back and smiled. Later, I heard him say, "It's lonely at the top, but I love that lonesome feeling." At first, I thought he was just being funny, but as I grew older, I understood what he meant. Elvis was so unique and accomplished that he had no peers in the entertainment world. He was a superstar before the term even existed. Elvis faced temptations that few people could imagine. He was adored by millions, and the world was his playground. But he stayed grounded and humble because of his faith and where he came from. He believed that no one was better than anyone else. He often said, "We're no different, no better than anybody else. We entertain the common, everyday workers who make the world go round." When people asked about his political views, Elvis would say, "I'm just an entertainer. I leave my political views out of it." He didn't want to use his fame to influence others. Instead, he focused on what really mattered: family, friends, and faith. One day when I was a teenager, I told Elvis I didn't know where I fit in. He said, "Billy, the mind is the devil's playground, but the heart is God's playground. The heart is what keeps you going. When you go looking for yourself, look in the Bible. It will help you find who you are." Elvis had a way of bringing everything back to the simple truths of God. Christmas at Graceland was always magical. Elvis made sure we understood the real meaning of the holiday. He would say, "Boys, it's not about presents, it's about Jesus' birthday. Let's not forget what this day represents." Thanksgiving was the kick-off to the holiday season. Family and friends would gather, and Elvis would ask everyone to share what they were thankful for. My mom would say a prayer, and we would enjoy a delicious meal. A week or 2 before Christmas, we would all help decorate the tree. Priscilla loved decorating the most. She would carefully place tinsel a few strands at a time, but Elvis would throw it on in handfuls, making everyone laugh. After the tree was decorated, Elvis would put the star on top. It was a beautiful sight, and you could feel the love in the room. Elvis loved shopping for gifts. He would have stores opened after hours, and we would follow him in our cars. He would walk down each aisle, picking out something for everyone. He was so thoughtful, and it was clear how much he cared about his family and friends. Once the gifts were wrapped, we would load them into the cars and head back to Graceland. On Christmas Eve, everyone would gather at Graceland. The house was filled with the smells of turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie. Elvis would make his grand entrance, hugging and thanking everyone for being there. After dinner, we would open presents. Elvis's joy was contagious, and he loved watching everyone open their gifts. He was a giver, not a taker, but Elvis's generosity didn't stop there. One night, a few days before Christmas, Sonny West told Elvis about a lady who had lost everything in a fire. Without hesitation, Elvis said, "I'll help her." The next day, he had a store opened and bought clothes, furniture, and toys for her and her children. He rented an apartment and had everything delivered. Sonny took the lady to her new home, and she was overjoyed. When she asked who did it, Sonny said, "Santa Claus did it." Years later, I met the lady and learned about what Elvis had done. She was so grateful and said, "Tell Santa Claus thank you, and tell Elvis thank you also." That's the kind of person Elvis was. He cared deeply about others, and his love for people went far beyond his family and friends. Christmas with Elvis was never just about material things. It was about the gifts of friendship, family, and faith. Elvis loved the holidays, especially Christmas. For him, it wasn't just about the lights, the gifts, or the parties. It was about the spirit of the season, the birth of Jesus, and the joy of giving. One year, he had a brilliant idea. He decided to ride around Memphis on motorcycles, looking at Christmas lights and singing carols. We all bundled up in our warmest clothes and joined him. We rode through the streets, stopping at various houses to sing a Christmas carol or two. The people we visited didn't know us, but their faces lit up when they saw Elvis leading the choir. The Memphis press caught wind of it and dubbed us L's Angels. To Elvis, Christmas was more than just a holiday. It was a reminder of the love and sacrifice of Jesus. He often talked about how Jesus was born into poverty, but changed the world. One time he said to me, "Just think, Billy, Jesus was born with nothing, but look what he became." A tear would sometimes come to his eye when he talked about that special day. He aspired to be like Jesus, bringing happiness and love to others. I told him, "You are Elvis. You bring joy to people's lives and help those in need." He smiled, gave me a hug, and thanked me for my words. Elvis's love for music was deep, especially gospel music. He saw it as more than just entertainment. It was a calling and a ministry. The only Grammy Awards he won were for his gospel music. He would often sing gospel songs with such passion that it touched people's hearts and changed their lives. I remember a time when a burly biker told me he believed in the Lord because of how Elvis sang gospel. It was a powerful moment, showing how music can truly make a difference. Elvis was always working to perfect his craft. He was a perfectionist and would never listen to his own recordings because he felt he could always do better. He told me, "When I hear my own music, all I want to do is go fix it. But I can't because it's already been done." He had a clear vision for his music and wouldn't let anyone tell him what to do. When a producer tried to tell him how to sing, Elvis said, "Why don't you come in here and sing it any way you want and I'll produce you?" It was a funny moment, but it showed his dedication to his art. Elvis's approach to music was unique. He would listen to a song for 24 hours straight, living with it, until it became a part of him. This is how he made songs like "Bridge Over Troubled Water" and "Yesterday" his own. When Paul Simon heard Elvis sing "Bridge Over Troubled Water" at Madison Square Garden, he said, "That's the way the song should have been done." Elvis had a way of making any song soulful and personal. Elvis's faith was a central part of his life. He often wrote notes in his Bible, like "Sing the Lord's Praises" under Psalm 81, and "Sing for the Glory of God" at the end of Psalms. He believed that his voice was a gift from God, and that he should use it to honor God. He would pray before every show, asking for God's blessing and strength. His energy and charisma were not just on stage, they were a part of who he was. One of the most memorable moments I have of Elvis is when he joined my brother David and me in our music shed. We were jamming to Led Zeppelin, and Elvis walked in, laughing and asking if he could play with us. He grabbed a guitar and played for hours, nailing every song after hearing it just once. It was a magical moment, showing how music brought us all together. Elvis's generosity was another aspect of his character that stood out. He remembered what it was like to be poor, and wanted to help others avoid that struggle. He often said, "It's not a sin to be rich, but it is a sin to love money." He lived by Proverbs chapter 11, verse 25, which says, "A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." Giving to others brought him joy and fulfillment. He saw himself as a vessel of God's love, using his gifts to make a difference in the world. One day, Elvis said, "Let's go for a ride, Billy." Whenever he said that, I would grab his wallet and put it in my briefcase. The wallet was always stuffed with cash, and it was easier to carry it in my briefcase. We would drive around, and Elvis would often stop to help people in need, whether it was buying them a meal or giving them money. His generosity knew no bounds, and it was one of the many things that made him truly special. Elvis Presley was more than just a music and movie star. He was a man with a heart as big as his fame. When you think about why people loved Elvis so much, it goes beyond his songs and his movies. It's because he loved them first. One summer day, I was playing outside at Graceland, and I saw people waving from the trees. I was just a kid, but Elvis showed me the importance of those fans. He took my hand and led me to the fence, where he greeted them with a smile. "I love you too," he said, and those words meant the world to all of us. Elvis didn't just love his fans, he loved everyone he met. He once stopped a concert to wait for a little girl, with a disability to arrive. He said, "I sang for that one little girl, and there wasn't a dry eye in the car after that." Money didn't mean much to Elvis. He used it to make others happy. I remember a time when we were driving and saw a man who looked down on his luck. Elvis told me to get all the money from his wallet, thousands of dollars, and gave it to the man. The man was crying, and so was Elvis. He said, "What good is having money if you can't help others?" Elvis's generosity wasn't just about money. He gave his time, his attention, and his love. When he saw a couple at a Cadillac dealership, he bought them a car. When he met an Elvis impersonator, he said, "If someone wants to look like me and act like me on stage, more power to him." Elvis believed in the power of encouragement. He would always take the time to talk to people and make them feel important. Whether it was a construction worker or a president, Elvis made everyone feel like they mattered. He would say, "You are just as important as I am." For Elvis, the people of Memphis were more than fans. They were family. He could ride his motorcycle through the city, and people would just wave and smile. They loved him, and he loved them back. Elvis's love for others came from his faith. He believed in treating everyone with kindness and respect, just like Jesus did. He often said, "God loves a cheerful giver," and he lived that every day. Elvis knew how much his fans loved him. He saw it in the letters, the records they bought, and the way they greeted him. He felt it in their smiles and their applause. But the most important thing was that he loved them first. Elvis Presley may have been a superstar, but he was a man who lived his life with a heart full of love. His legacy isn't just the music he made, it's the lives he changed. And that's why, even today, people still love Elvis.